Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the year is 1944. The world is gripped by a war unlike any other, a war fought in the skies as much as on the ground. Tonight, we're going to tell a story of mistaken identity, devastation, and unlikely friendship. It's a story that reminds us that even in the darkest of times, humanity can bloom in the most unexpected places. Our story begins with Lieutenant Gale Halvorsen, a young, fresh-faced pilot in the United States Army Air Forces. He was stationed in England, flying bombing missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. Gale was a good pilot, meticulous and dedicated, but he was also just a young man, barely out of his teens, thrust into a world of unimaginable violence. Now, picture a small village in France, nestled in the rolling countryside. It's called Saint-Mère-Église. If that name sounds familiar, it's because it was one of the first towns liberated during the D-Day landings. But that was months ago, and life had slowly begun to return to something resembling normal, although the scars of war were still visible everywhere. In Saint-Mère-Église lived a young French boy named Henri-Jean Renaud. He was just a child when the war began, and he had seen things no child should ever see: the occupation, the fighting, the fear. But he was resilient, like so many children of that era. He dreamed of a future free from war, a future where he could simply be a boy again. One day, Gale's bomber group received orders to strike a German ammunition depot located near a French town. The briefing was rushed, the maps were unclear, and in the chaos of war, a terrible mistake was made. Gale's plane, along with several others, mistakenly targeted Saint-Mère-Église itself. Bombs rained down on the unsuspecting village. Buildings crumbled, lives were lost, and Henri-Jean's home was completely destroyed. He and his family managed to escape with their lives, but they lost everything they owned. The devastation was immense, the grief overwhelming. Gale, horrified by what he had done, was consumed by guilt. He knew immediately that they had bombed the wrong target. He spent weeks haunted by the images of the destruction and the thought of the innocent lives lost. He tried to find a way to atone for his mistake, but in the midst of war, it seemed impossible. Years passed. The war ended, and the world slowly began to heal. Gale returned to the United States, but he never forgot Saint-Mère-Église. He carried the weight of his mistake with him, a constant reminder of the tragedy he had inadvertently caused. Then, in the late 1940s, Gale learned about a program called the Berlin Airlift, where American pilots were flying supplies into West Berlin, which was blockaded by the Soviet Union. He saw this as an opportunity to do something good, to use his skills as a pilot to help people in need. While in Berlin, Gale started a tradition of dropping candy attached to tiny parachutes to the children below. He became known as the Candy Bomber or Uncle Wiggly Wings, and his actions brought joy and hope to the children of Berlin. Meanwhile, in Saint-Mère-Église, Henri-Jean was growing up, rebuilding his life. He knew about the bombing, of course, but he didn't harbor any hatred towards the American pilots. He understood that it was a mistake, a tragic consequence of war. One day, Henri-Jean learned about the Candy Bomber in Berlin. He was touched by the pilot's generosity and kindness. He realized that even in the midst of war, there were people who cared, people who wanted to make a difference. Years later, in the 1980s, a chance encounter brought Gale and Henri-Jean together. Gale, driven by a lifelong desire to make amends, decided to visit Saint-Mère-Église. He wanted to meet the people he had inadvertently harmed, to apologize for the bombing. When Gale and Henri-Jean met, there was a moment of awkward silence. But then Henri-Jean stepped forward and embraced Gale. He told him that he understood it was a mistake, that he forgave him. He said that the bombing had been a tragedy, but it didn't define their relationship. From that day forward, Gale and Henri-Jean became the best of friends. They traveled together, they shared their stories, and they worked together to promote peace and understanding. Gale continued to visit Saint-Mère-Église every year, and he became an honorary citizen of the town. Their friendship was a testament to the power of forgiveness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the ability of people to find common ground even after the most devastating of events. It's a story that reminds us that even in the darkest of times, hope can still prevail, and that even the most unlikely of events can lead to the most beautiful of friendships. Sleep well. Close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and imagine a world at war. A world cloaked in shadows where victory hung precariously in the balance. Now imagine a secret weapon, not of steel and fire, but of illusion. This is the story of the Ghost Army, a unit so audacious, so unconventional that their very existence defied belief. It was 1944. Europe was scarred by conflict. The Allies were pushing east, but every advance was met with fierce resistance. The German army, though weakened, remained a formidable foe. They were masters of deception themselves, adept at concealing troop movements and fortifications. So how could the Allies possibly gain an edge? Enter the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, later known as the Ghost Army. This wasn't your average fighting unit. It was a collection of artists, designers, sound engineers, and actors, all handpicked for their unique talents. Their mission: to trick the enemy into believing the Allies were somewhere they weren't. Think of it like a grand stage production, but instead of applause, the stakes were life and death. The Ghost Army's arsenal wasn't filled with tanks and artillery, but with inflatable tanks, rubber airplanes, and meticulously crafted sound effects. They were masters of mimicry, capable of replicating the sounds of entire armored divisions on the move. Their operations were elaborate, almost theatrical. First, they'd scout an area, carefully studying the terrain and the likely vantage points of German observers. Then, the show would begin. Inflatable tanks, meticulously painted and positioned, would be inflated under the cover of darkness. Dummy artillery pieces would be strategically placed to create the illusion of a vast battery. But the visual deception was only half the battle. The Ghost Army also deployed sonic trickery on a grand scale. Using powerful amplifiers and recordings, they could simulate the sounds of tank engines, artillery fire, and even the chatter of soldiers. These sounds would be carefully broadcast in specific directions, designed to mislead enemy reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. They even employed actors, dressed as high-ranking officers, who would frequent local cafes and bars, loudly discussing fabricated battle plans, carefully overheard by German spies. One of their most successful operations took place during the Battle of the Bulge. As the real Allied forces struggled to contain the German offensive, the Ghost Army was deployed to create a diversion. They simulated the presence of a large armored division, drawing German attention away from the critical front lines. This bought precious time for the real Allied forces to regroup and ultimately repel the German attack. The Ghost Army operated in complete secrecy. Their missions were classified, and their existence was largely unknown to the public for decades. They moved from location to location, creating elaborate deceptions across Europe, from France to Germany. They participated in over 20 operations, often operating close to the front lines, risking capture and exposure. The true impact of their work is difficult to quantify, but historians believe that the Ghost Army played a significant role in saving lives and shortening the war. By diverting German attention and resources, they helped to create opportunities for the real Allied forces to advance. Their ingenuity and courage are a testament to the power of creativity in the face of adversity. For years, their story remained untold, a secret whispered among those who served. But finally, the truth has emerged, revealing the extraordinary tale of the Ghost Army, the illusionists who helped to win the war. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember the Ghost Army. Remember their courage, their creativity, and their unwavering commitment to deception. They are a reminder that even in the darkest of times, ingenuity and imagination can be powerful weapons. Sweet dreams. Welcome, weary traveler, to a tale as improbable as it is true. Settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and let me tell you about a dog named Stubby, a dog who went to war. Not just any war, mind you, but the Great War, the war to end all wars, a conflict that swallowed nations and changed the world forever. Now, in 1917, America was just beginning to stir from its isolation. Young men flocked to training camps, eager, or perhaps resigned, to join the fight in the muddy trenches of France. One such camp was located at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. It was here, amidst the hustle and bustle of marching soldiers and barking orders, that a scruffy, brindle-and-white stray puppy wandered into their lives. This wasn't your pampered pedigree. Stubby, as the soldiers quickly nicknamed him, was a mix, a bit of Boston Terrier, a dash of something else entirely. He was small, compact, and possessed an undeniable charm. He had a way of tilting his head, his dark eyes gleaming with intelligence that just melted the hearts of those hardened soldiers. Private J. Robert Conroy, a young man from New Britain, Connecticut, took a particular liking to Stubby. He began to secretly train the dog, teaching him simple commands: sit, stay, fetch. Stubby, surprisingly quick-witted, learned with enthusiasm. He became the unofficial mascot of the 102nd Infantry Regiment, 26th Yankee Division. When the time came for the regiment to deploy to France, Conroy couldn't bear to leave Stubby behind. He smuggled him aboard the troop transport, hiding him under his overcoat. Imagine the scene: thousands of soldiers crammed onto a ship, the churning ocean beneath, and a tiny dog tucked away, hoping not to be discovered. Eventually, Stubby was found. But his charm, his undeniable connection to the men, had already worked its magic. The commanding officer, initially stern, saw the morale boost Stubby provided. He allowed him to stay, officially adopting him as the regiment's mascot. Life in the trenches was brutal. The constant bombardment, the ever-present threat of gas attacks, the sheer misery of living in mud and filth, it was enough to break even the strongest spirits. But Stubby was there. He would patrol the trenches, offering a lick or a comforting presence to the weary soldiers. He learned to recognize the sounds of incoming artillery shells, giving a warning bark that allowed the men to take cover. One day, Stubby was caught in a mustard gas attack. He suffered severe burns to his lungs and skin. The experience left him with a heightened sensitivity to the smell of gas. And this, my friends, is where Stubby's true heroism began to shine. Recovered from his injuries, Stubby began using his keen sense of smell to detect gas attacks before they happened. He would run through the trenches, barking and alerting the sleeping soldiers, giving them precious seconds to don their gas masks. He saved countless lives, but his most remarkable feat came when he single-handedly captured a German spy. While patrolling no man's land, Stubby detected the scent of a German soldier hiding in the bushes. He charged at the spy, barking furiously and biting at his legs, holding him until American soldiers arrived. The spy was carrying detailed plans of Allied trenches, information that could have cost many lives. For his bravery and service, Stubby was awarded numerous medals, including a medal from the Humane Education Society and a service medal from the YMCA. He even met 3 presidents: Woodrow Wilson, Calvin Coolidge, and Warren G. Harding. He became a lifetime member of the American Legion. When the war ended, Stubby returned home a hero. He led parades, visited schools, and became a symbol of courage and loyalty. He lived out his days with Private Conroy, a constant reminder of the bond between humans and animals and the extraordinary things that can happen when they face adversity together. Sergeant Stubby, the little stray dog who sniffed out bombs and captured spies, passed away in 1926. But his story continues to inspire us, a testament to the unwavering spirit of a dog who went to war and came home a hero. Sleep well, knowing that even the smallest among us can make a big difference. Good night. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the crisp, clean air of Norway in winter. The snow is deep, the sky a pale blue, and the mountains stand like silent giants dusted with white. Tonight, we're going to drift off to a story of quiet heroism, of daring deeds done in the face of unimaginable danger. A story of skiing, espionage, and a substance called heavy water. This tale begins not on a battlefield, but in a laboratory. Before the Second World War, scientists understood that a specific type of uranium, when bombarded with neutrons, could unleash a chain reaction, creating unimaginable energy. This was the theoretical basis for the atomic bomb. Germany, under Nazi control, was desperate to develop this weapon first, and that's where the Vemork hydroelectric plant comes in. Nestled in the Telemark region of Norway, Vemork was the only facility in the world producing heavy water on an industrial scale. Heavy water, or deuterium oxide, was a crucial ingredient in the early attempts to create a nuclear reactor capable of producing plutonium, another element potentially useful for a bomb. The Germans knew its importance and quickly seized control of the plant after occupying Norway in 1940. The Allies knew they had to stop them. The risk of a Nazi atomic bomb was simply too great. Early bombing raids were considered, but the plant's remote location and robust construction made it a difficult target. A ground operation was the only viable option, but the terrain was treacherous. The solution? To use Norwegian resistance fighters, men who knew the land like the back of their hand, men who were born to ski. The first operation, codenamed Grouse, involved 4 men parachuting onto the Hardangervidda Plateau, a vast, desolate wilderness high in the mountains. Their mission? To reconnoiter the area and prepare for a larger team. They endured weeks of blizzard conditions, barely surviving on moss and lichen, waiting for the signal that the main force was ready. It was a test of endurance and resilience that few could have passed. Then came Gunnerside. A team of 6 highly trained commandos, mostly Norwegian, were dropped in to reinforce Grouse. They faced an immediate problem. Their original landing zone was compromised, forcing them to ski for days across unforgiving terrain to reach the rendezvous point. Imagine the biting wind, the deep snow, the constant threat of discovery. The plan was daring: to infiltrate the seemingly impregnable Vemork plant and destroy the heavy water production equipment. The team decided to descend a steep, icy gorge, a near-suicidal route, rather than risk confronting the heavily guarded main entrance. They navigated the treacherous descent, using ropes and sheer willpower, their skis strapped to their backs. At the bottom of the gorge, they crossed a frozen river and cut through a lightly guarded fence. One of the commandos, Nut Hawkilid, had worked at Vemork before the war and knew the layout intimately. He guided the team through the labyrinthine corridors to the electrolysis chamber, the heart of the heavy water production. The German guards were caught completely off guard. The commandos planted explosive charges, carefully calibrated to destroy the equipment without causing a major explosion that could jeopardize the entire plant. The charges detonated, shattering the heavy water cells and effectively shutting down production. Then came the escape. The team split up, some skiing to safety in Sweden, others melting back into the local population. The Germans were furious, launching a massive manhunt, but the saboteurs had vanished into the snow-covered wilderness. The raid was a remarkable success, delaying the German atomic program by months, perhaps even years. It was a small victory, but one that had enormous strategic implications. It demonstrated the power of courage, resilience, and the unwavering determination of ordinary people to resist tyranny. The Germans attempted to rebuild the plant, but further Allied actions, including bombing raids and another sabotage mission, ensured that Vemork never again produced significant quantities of heavy water. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember the brave men who skied through the Norwegian wilderness, facing danger and hardship with quiet determination. Remember the story of Vemork, a testament to the power of courage and the importance of standing up for what is right. Let the image of snow-covered mountains and the quiet heroism of these men fill your dreams. Sleep soundly. Close your eyes for a moment, breathe deeply, and let me tell you a story. A story not of grand offensives or pivotal turning points, but of a small, forgotten battle, a battle fought with a strange alliance in the dying days of the Second World War. It's a tale of American and German soldiers, bitter enemies for years, standing shoulder to shoulder against a common foe. This is the story of the Battle of Castle-Itter, imagine Austria, in early May 1945. The Third Reich is crumbling, Hitler is dead. Surrender is imminent, but pockets of fanatical SS soldiers, unwilling to accept defeat, are still roaming the countryside, enforcing a brutal order and determined to fight to the last man. High in the Austrian Alps, nestled near the village of Itter, sat Castle-Itter. A medieval fortress, it had been repurposed by the Nazis into a prison for prominent French political figures and VIPs. Among them were former prime ministers, generals, tennis stars, and even Charles de Gaulle's sister. These weren't just ordinary prisoners, they were valuable bargaining chips, or perhaps targets for elimination should the Reich finally collapse. As the Americans advanced, the Wehrmacht garrison guarding the castle deserted their posts, leaving the prisoners vulnerable. The SS, however, were closing in, intent on executing everyone inside. Knowing their lives were in imminent danger, the prisoners decided to act. One of them, a Yugoslavian prisoner working as a handyman, managed to escape and make contact with the advancing American forces. He found Major Joseph Gangel, a decorated Wehrmacht officer who had recently decided to defy Nazi orders. Gangel, disgusted by the SS atrocities and determined to protect the local population, had already surrendered to the Austrian resistance. He knew the area intimately and understood the threat the SS posed. Gangel, realizing the gravity of the situation at Castle-Itter, approached the Americans. He sought their assistance, explaining the plight of the prisoners and the impending attack by the SS. The Americans, led by Captain John C. Jack Lee Jr., initially hesitant to trust a German officer, quickly recognized the urgency and the genuine sincerity in Gangel's plea. Captain Lee, despite being outnumbered and facing an uncertain situation, agreed to help. He gathered a small force of American soldiers from the 23rd Tank Battalion, part of the 12th Armored Division. They set off towards Castle-Itter, knowing they were heading into a potential trap. Meanwhile, the French prisoners, aware of the impending attack, were preparing to defend themselves as best they could. They had managed to scavenge a few weapons left behind by the fleeing Wehrmacht soldiers. What makes this battle so unique is that when Captain Lee and his men arrived at Castle-Itter, they found not only the French prisoners, but also Major Gangel and a small detachment of Wehrmacht soldiers loyal to him, all ready to fight alongside the Americans. Enemies just days before, they were now united by a common cause, to protect the prisoners from the fanatical SS. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. The SS, heavily armed and determined, launched wave after wave of attacks on the castle. The Americans, the Wehrmacht soldiers, and the French prisoners fought bravely side by side, repelling each assault. Major Gangel, acting as a liaison between the Americans and the Wehrmacht soldiers, played a crucial role in coordinating the defense. He was tragically killed by an SS sniper while trying to protect one of the French prisoners. His sacrifice cemented his place as a hero, not just to the French, but to all who fought at Castle-Itter. After hours of intense fighting, with ammunition running low and the SS unrelenting, reinforcements finally arrived. Elements of the 103rd Infantry Division, alerted by the sounds of battle, arrived to relieve the defenders and drive off the remaining SS troops. The Battle of Castle-Itter was over. It was a small, localized conflict, but it symbolized the changing tides of the war. It demonstrated that even in the darkest of times, alliances could be forged between former enemies, united by a common humanity and a desire to fight against tyranny. It was a battle where Americans and Germans, French prisoners and loyal Wehrmacht soldiers stood together against a common foe, securing a victory for hope and compassion in the face of unimaginable brutality. The story of Castle-Itter is a reminder that even in the chaos of war, acts of courage, selflessness, and unlikely alliances can emerge. It's a story worth remembering, a story of hope amidst the darkness. Now take another deep breath, let your mind drift, and allow yourself to drift off to sleep, knowing that even in the face of adversity, good can prevail. Close your eyes now, take a deep breath, and imagine a world at war. A world consumed by conflict, where communication was the lifeline between victory and defeat. Think of the vast Pacific Ocean, dotted with islands, each a fierce battleground, a testament to bravery, and a desperate need for secure communication. In the early 1940s, the United States Marine Corps faced a daunting challenge. Their coded messages were being intercepted and deciphered by the Japanese. Every tactical advantage, every carefully planned maneuver was vulnerable. The enemy knew their next move almost before they did. They needed a code, an unbreakable code, and they found it in a most unexpected place, the Navajo Nation. The Navajo language, Diné Bizard, is incredibly complex. It's a tonal language, meaning the pitch of a word changes its meaning entirely. It has intricate grammatical structures and sounds that are almost impossible for someone unfamiliar with the language to replicate. It's a language rooted in a rich oral tradition, passed down through generations, a language that at the time was largely unwritten and unknown outside the Navajo community. Philip Johnston, the son of a missionary who had grown up on the Navajo reservation and spoke the language fluently, understood the potential of Diné Bizard. He proposed to the Marine Corps that they recruit Navajo speakers to develop a code based on their native tongue. The idea was initially met with skepticism, but Johnston persisted, demonstrating the language's unintelligibility to non-Navajos. And so, in 1942, the first group of 29 Navajo men arrived at Camp Pendleton, California. These were the original Navajo code talkers, and their mission was to create a unique code that would baffle the enemy. They weren't simply translating English into Navajo. That would have been too straightforward. Instead, they devised a code where common military terms were replaced with Navajo words. For example, submarine became iron fish, battleship became whale, and bomber became buzzard. This required not just translation, but creative adaptation, a whole new vocabulary for warfare. Some terms, however, had no direct equivalent in the Navajo language. For these, the code talkers created a system of spelling out words using Navajo words as stand-ins for letters. So, for example, to spell the letter A, they might use the Navajo word wallachi, meaning ant. For B, they might use bilasana, meaning apple. This added another layer of complexity, making the code even more difficult to break. The code talkers memorized hundreds of these code words and phrases. They trained tirelessly, practicing transmitting and receiving messages under simulated combat conditions. They were not just translators, they were warriors, skilled in communication and deeply committed to their nation. Their first real test came during the Guadalcanal campaign. The messages they sent were fast, accurate, and most importantly, unbreakable. The Navajo code talkers proved their worth, relaying crucial information about troop movements, enemy positions, and supply lines. Their contribution was invaluable, helping the Marines secure vital victories. Throughout the Pacific Theater, from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, the Navajo code talkers served with distinction. They participated in every major Marine operation, transmitting vital messages under intense enemy fire. Their courage and dedication saved countless lives and played a significant role in the Allied victory. Even after the war, their contribution remained a secret. The code was deemed too valuable to be revealed, and the code talkers were sworn to secrecy. It wasn't until 1968 that their story was finally declassified, allowing them to receive the recognition they deserved. In 2000, the original 29 Navajo code talkers were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for their extraordinary service. The story of the Navajo code talkers is a testament to the power of language, the resilience of a culture, and the unwavering bravery of a group of remarkable men. It's a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected solutions can be the most effective. So as you drift off to sleep, remember the Navajo code talkers, the guardians of an unbreakable language, who helped turn the tide of war with their words, their courage, and their unwavering dedication to their country. Sweet dreams. Let me tell you about the Ballad of Tokyo Rose. Was she a traitor or a victim? This is a fascinating topic. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the Paris of 1942, a city draped in shadows, not just from the buildings, but from fear itself. The Nazi occupation was a heavy blanket, stifling hope and breathing suspicion into every corner. Tonight, we're going to tell the story of a man who, against all odds, managed to slip through the fingers of the Gestapo armed with nothing more than a cleverly forged identity and a truly remarkable amount of luck. His name was Jean-Pierre. Though that wasn't the name on the papers he carried. Those papers belonged to a baker named Antoine Dubois, a man of simple routines and unremarkable features, perfect for blending in. Jean-Pierre, you see, was a member of the French resistance. He wasn't a soldier, not in the traditional sense. He was a courier, a vital link in the underground network, carrying messages, documents, and sometimes even people across the city and beyond. He'd acquired the fake ID from a printer friend, a quiet man named Marcel who worked in the back of a bookshop. Marcel was a master craftsman, able to replicate official documents with an uncanny accuracy. But even the best forgery could crumble under the intense scrutiny of the Gestapo. Jean-Pierre knew this. He lived with that knowledge every day. His days were a delicate dance. He moved through the streets with a baker's gait, slightly stooped, carrying a worn leather bag filled with, well, not quite baguettes. He knew the Gestapo checkpoints were unpredictable, popping up like poisonous mushrooms in the middle of a sunny field. He'd memorized the streets, the alleys, the back doors, escape routes woven into the fabric of the city. One afternoon, while delivering a message to a safe house near the Seine, Jean-Pierre felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He turned a corner and saw them, two Gestapo officers, their faces grim, their uniforms crisp and menacing. They were stopping people at random, demanding identification. Jean-Pierre's heart hammered against his ribs. He fought to control his breathing, forcing himself to remember Antoine Dubois, the baker. He smoothed his worn apron, adjusted his cap, and tried to look harmless. He was stopped. "Papillon bit," one of the officers barked, his voice laced with suspicion. Jean-Pierre, as Antoine Dubois, fumbled in his pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as he produced the forged identification card. He handed it over, avoiding eye contact. The officer examined the card, his eyes scanning every detail: the photograph, the stamps, the signature. The silence stretched. Each second felt like an eternity. Jean-Pierre focused on breathing, on keeping his face neutral. He imagined the smell of baking bread, the warmth of the oven. Anything to distract him from the fear that threatened to consume him. The officer looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "Your address?" he asked, his French heavily accented. Jean-Pierre recited the address. Marcel had provided the address of a real baker named Antoine Dubois, a man who had conveniently moved to the countryside a few months earlier. He even described the small bakery, the aroma of fresh bread, the early morning deliveries. He'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head. The officer seemed unconvinced. He asked more questions about the price of flour, the best way to make a croissant, the names of his regular customers. Jean-Pierre answered as best he could, drawing on the information Marcel had gleaned from the real Antoine Dubois' former neighbors. Then the officer asked a question that nearly made Jean-Pierre's blood run cold. "What is your wife's name?" Jean-Pierre froze. He hadn't prepared for this. He didn't know Antoine Dubois' wife's name. He hesitated for what felt like an age. Then, a miracle, a young woman carrying a basket of laundry approached the checkpoint. She saw Jean-Pierre, and a look of recognition flashed across her face. "Antoine," she called out, her voice clear and bright. "Don't forget the sugar I asked you to pick up." She walked past the officers, giving Jean-Pierre a knowing wink. He managed a weak smile and nodded. The officer, perhaps tired of the interrogation, or perhaps simply convinced by the woman's casual greeting, handed back the identification card. "Waiter," he said dismissively, "move along." Jean-Pierre, his legs feeling like jelly, walked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't look back. He disappeared into the labyrinthine streets of Paris, swallowed by the shadows. He later learned that the woman was also a member of the resistance, a local laundress who knew Antoine Dubois and recognized the danger Jean-Pierre was in. Her quick thinking had saved his life. Jean-Pierre continued his work for the resistance, always living on the edge, always relying on his wits and his forged identity. He survived the war, a testament to his courage, his resourcefulness, and a healthy dose of pure, unadulterated luck. He always remembered the laundress, the woman who called him Antoine, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, kindness and courage can shine through. And that, dear listener, is the story of the man who outsmarted the Gestapo with a fake ID and a lot of luck. Sleep well. Welcome, weary traveler, to a quiet corner of history. Tonight, we'll drift back to the turbulent years of World War II, but not to the battlefields themselves. Instead, we'll focus on a gentler, often overlooked, yet incredibly vital story, the tale of the pigeon post. Imagine, if you will, a world without instant communication, a world where radios could be intercepted and telephone lines cut. In such a world, how could secret agents relay vital information? How could isolated units call for help? How could entire resistance movements coordinate their efforts? The answer, surprisingly, often came on feathered wings. The practice of using pigeons to carry messages stretches back centuries, even millennia. But during World War II, it was resurrected with a renewed sense of urgency and purpose. The British, in particular, heavily relied on pigeons through their National Pigeon Service, NPS. Think of it, thousands of these unassuming birds, bred and trained for the task, becoming crucial cogs in the war machine. Farmers, civilians, even children volunteered to keep and care for these feathered messengers, knowing that their efforts could literally save lives. These weren't just any pigeons, of course. They were homing pigeons, bred with an innate ability to navigate back to their lofts, sometimes over incredible distances. Their training was rigorous, starting with short flights and gradually increasing the distance. They were taught to associate their loft with food and safety, creating a powerful instinct to return home, no matter the obstacles. Imagine a small bird released into the vast, unpredictable world, driven by an unshakable desire to fly home. When a pigeon was needed for a mission, a small, lightweight message capsule, often made of aluminium or celluloid, would be attached to its leg. These capsules, no bigger than your thumb, held vital information, coded messages, maps, even photographs reduced to microfilm. The pigeon would then be released, its innate homing instinct kicking in, soaring through the skies, dodging predators, and braving the elements to deliver its precious cargo. It wasn't an easy life for these birds. They faced countless dangers. Enemy soldiers were instructed to shoot them down. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a sprawling country estate nestled in the quiet English countryside. It's 1939 and the world is on the brink of war. This is Bletchley Park, a place that would become synonymous with secrets, ingenuity, and the extraordinary contributions of ordinary people, especially women. Before the war, Bletchley Park was a relatively unremarkable Victorian mansion, but the British government had a very special purpose in mind for it. They needed a place to break codes, the codes of the enemy, and to do that, they needed minds, the sharpest, most analytical minds they could find. Now, you might picture stern-faced military men huddled over complicated machines, and there were some men involved, of course. But the vast majority of the codebreakers at Bletchley Park were women. Young women, old women, women from all walks of life. Recruited for their intelligence, their linguistic skills, their mathematical prowess, and perhaps most importantly, their unwavering discretion. Think about it, a typing test was often the first hurdle, a seemingly mundane task, but vital for operating the complex machines that would become central to the code-breaking process. Imagine the rows of women, their fingers flying across the keyboards, the rhythmic clatter echoing through the room. Each keystroke a tiny contribution to a monumental effort. These women weren't just typists, though. They were mathematicians, linguists, logicians, and cryptanalysts. They were the unsung heroes of the war, working tirelessly day and night, often in cramped, poorly lit conditions, fueled by endless cups of tea and the unwavering belief that their work could save lives. The Enigma machine was the enemy's most formidable weapon in the world of cryptography. A complex electromechanical rotor cipher device used by the German military to encrypt their communications. To the untrained eye, it looked like a complicated typewriter, but inside, a series of rotors scrambled messages into indecipherable gibberish, or so they thought. The women of Bletchley Park, along with brilliant minds like Alan Turing, worked tirelessly to unravel the Enigma's secrets. Imagine the painstaking process. Intercepting coded messages, meticulously analyzing patterns, searching for weaknesses in the Enigma's seemingly impenetrable encryption. It was like piecing together a giant, ever-changing puzzle with the highest stakes imaginable. One of the most crucial roles was that of the Wrens, members of the Women's Royal Naval Service. They operated the bomb machines, electromechanical devices designed by Turing and others to rapidly test different Enigma settings. These machines were enormous, noisy contraptions, and the Wrens were responsible for keeping them running smoothly, changing rotors, and interpreting the results. Think of the pressure, knowing that every second counted, every missed connection could mean the difference between life and death for soldiers on the front lines. Other women worked in the testery, meticulously checking the output of the bomb machines, looking for the cribs, pieces of known plaintext that could help unlock the Enigma's settings. Imagine the concentration required, poring over endless streams of letters and numbers, searching for that crucial breakthrough. Then there were the women who handled the decrypted messages, translating them, analyzing their content, and disseminating the intelligence to the Allied forces. They had to be incredibly careful, ensuring that the information was delivered quickly and accurately without revealing the fact that the Enigma code had been broken. The work at Bletchley Park was shrouded in secrecy. The women were sworn to absolute silence, unable to even tell their families what they were doing. Imagine the burden of carrying such a heavy secret, of knowing that you were playing a vital role in the war effort, but being unable to share your experiences with anyone. The impact of their work was immense. By cracking the Enigma code, the women of Bletchley Park provided the Allies with invaluable intelligence, allowing them to anticipate enemy movements, disrupt supply lines, and ultimately shorten the war. It's estimated that their work saved millions of lives and shortened the war by at least 2 years. After the war, their contributions remained largely unknown. The secrecy surrounding Bletchley Park was maintained for decades, and the women who had served there were forbidden from speaking about their experiences. They returned to their ordinary lives, carrying their secrets with them. Only in recent years has their story begun to be told, and their extraordinary contributions finally recognized. The women of Bletchley Park were not just typists or machine operators. They were brilliant, dedicated, and courageous individuals who played a vital role in winning the war. They were the unsung heroes, the secret weapon that helped to defeat the enemy. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember the women of Bletchley Park, their quiet courage, their unwavering dedication, and their extraordinary contribution to history. Their story is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the importance of recognizing the contributions of all, regardless of gender or background. Sweet dreams. All right, settle in, make yourself comfortable. Tonight, we're going to drift back in time to a world at war, but with a twist. A tale of intrigue, a dash of culinary espionage, and a baker named, well, we'll call him Jean. Jean, a simple baker from a small village in France, found himself swept up in the maelstrom of World War II. His village, once a haven of quiet mornings and the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, was now under the oppressive thumb of Nazi occupation. Jean wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a spy, not initially anyway. He was just a baker, a craftsman dedicated to the art of turning flour, water, and yeast into something nourishing and life-affirming. But the Nazis, they loved their bread, especially their leader. And so Jean, along with other local bakers, was forced to supply the occupying forces, including the elite detachment responsible for Adolf Hitler's personal security, whenever he visited the region. The idea, the seed of rebellion, was planted by a whispered conversation in the dead of night. A member of the French resistance, a woman named Sophie with eyes that burned with quiet defiance, approached Jean. She spoke of disrupting the Nazi war machine, of striking a blow from within. Her proposition was audacious, almost unbelievable: poison Hitler's bread. Not enough to kill him outright, that would cause too much suspicion and retribution, but enough to make him violently ill, to disrupt his plans, to sow chaos among his inner circle. Jean was terrified. The consequences of failure were unimaginable, but he was also filled with a simmering rage, a deep-seated hatred for the invaders who had stolen his peace and his livelihood. He considered Sophie's plan carefully. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it offered a sliver of hope, a chance to fight back in his own way. He agreed. The poison itself was a carefully chosen concoction provided by Sophie's contacts. It wasn't a lethal dose of cyanide, but a potent emetic designed to induce severe vomiting and stomach cramps. Untraceable, they assured him, at least with the limited resources the Nazis had at their disposal. Jean meticulously planned how to incorporate the poison into the bread destined for Hitler's table. He couldn't just sprinkle it on top. That would be too obvious. He needed a way to distribute it evenly, subtly, throughout the loaf. He settled on injecting the poison into the dough, using a modified syringe hidden within his baking tools. The day Hitler was scheduled to visit was filled with tension. The village was crawling with soldiers, their boots echoing on the cobblestone streets. Gene worked mechanically, his hands trembling slightly as he mixed and kneaded the dough. He waited for the opportune moment, a brief window of privacy when the guards were distracted. With a deep breath, he retrieved the syringe and carefully injected the poison into the heart of the loaf. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He then baked the loaf with the others, marking it subtly so he would recognize it later. The bread was delivered, the special loaf separated and sent off under heavy guard. Gene waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he wouldn't get any immediate confirmation, but he listened for rumors, for any sign of disruption among the German ranks. Days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. No reports of illness, no increased security measures, no reprisals against the village. Gene began to despair, to think that his efforts had been in vain. Perhaps the poison had been ineffective, or maybe Hitler hadn't even eaten the bread. The truth, however, was far more complex. Hitler did eat the bread. He did become violently ill, but the illness was dismissed as a simple case of food poisoning. His personal physician, a man more concerned with appeasing his Führer than uncovering a conspiracy, attributed the sickness to some bad fish served at the previous night's dinner. The incident was quickly hushed up, swept under the rug to avoid any embarrassment or panic within the Nazi high command. Gene never knew the full extent of his success. He continued to bake, to live under the shadow of occupation, but he carried with him a secret, a quiet satisfaction that he had struck a blow, however small, against the enemy. He was a baker, not a soldier, but he had used his skills, his knowledge, to fight back. And even though his attempt was only almost asterisk successful, his story serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, acts of courage and resistance, however small, can make a difference. Sleep well. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the vast, silent expanse of the Sahara Desert, endless dunes, scorching sun, and a feeling of absolute isolation. Now picture a World War II bomber, a B-24 Liberator nicknamed Lady Be Good, lying silently in that sand, a ghost from a forgotten mission. This is the incredible story of how that bomber and the mystery surrounding its crew was finally revealed decades later. The Lady Be Good was a B-24D Liberator, a 4-engine heavy bomber, fresh off the assembly line and assigned to the 376th Bomb Group, based in Soluce, Libya, in 1943. Its mission on April 4, 1943, was to bomb the Italian port city of Naples. It was a relatively routine mission, part of the Allied effort to cripple Axis supply lines. The crew consisted of 9 men: Lieutenant William Hatton, the pilot; Lieutenant Robert Toner, the co-pilot; Lieutenant D.P. Hayes, the navigator; Lieutenant John Waravka, the bombardier; Staff Sergeant Harold Rips, the radio operator; Staff Sergeant Robert Lamotte, the gunner; Staff Sergeant Guy Shelley, the engineer; Sergeant Vernon Moore, the gunner; and Sergeant Samuel Adams, the gunner. They were relatively inexperienced, a mix of young men eager to do their part. Their mission started like any other. They took off from Soluce, joined the bomber stream, and headed towards Italy. But things quickly began to unravel. Poor visibility and sandstorms plagued the formation. The Lady Be Good became separated from the group during the bombing run. They pressed on, dropped their bombs, and turned back towards Libya, or at least, they thought they did. Somewhere along the line, a critical navigational error was made. Perhaps the instruments malfunctioned, or perhaps the heavy weather disoriented the crew. Whatever the cause, the Lady Be Good flew far south, deeper into the Sahara Desert than anyone could have imagined. They continued flying for hours, believing they were heading towards their base. Fuel gauges dipped precariously low. Eventually, the engines sputtered and died. The crew, realizing they were hopelessly lost and out of fuel, made the difficult decision to bail out. They jumped into the darkness, trusting their parachutes to carry them to safety. What they didn't know was that they were still hundreds of miles from any known settlement, deep within one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The Lady Be Good, now empty, glided silently and crash-landed in the vast, empty desert. Its fuselage remained remarkably intact, a time capsule waiting to be discovered. Back at Soluch, the Lady Be Good was declared missing. Search parties were launched, but the vastness of the desert and the lack of accurate information made the search nearly impossible. The crew was presumed dead, lost to the war. Decades passed, the war ended, the world moved on. The Lady Be Good remained hidden, a secret buried beneath the shifting sands. It wasn't until November 9, 1958, that a British oil exploration team, surveying the desert by air, stumbled upon the wreckage. They couldn't believe their eyes. A perfectly preserved B-24 bomber sitting upright in the sand as if it had just landed. News of the discovery spread quickly. An American team was dispatched to investigate. Inside the plane, they found personal belongings, flight logs, and even water and food rations. The plane was remarkably well preserved, shielded from the elements by the dry desert air, but there was no sign of the crew. The mystery deepened. Why hadn't the crew stayed with the plane? It offered shelter, water, and a radio, albeit a potentially damaged one. The answer, as it turned out, was a testament to the crew's desperate attempt to find help. They had decided to walk towards what they believed was civilization. The search for the crew began in earnest. Over the next few months, the remains of 8 of the 9 crew members were found, scattered across the desert. They had walked for days, enduring unimaginable heat and thirst. Their diaries revealed their growing desperation and fading hope. The last entry, written by one of the men, poignantly stated their dwindling water supply and their determination to keep going. They were only 26 miles from the crash site when they finally succumbed to the elements. The body of Staff Sergeant Robert Lamotte was never found, adding another layer of mystery to the story. It's believed he became separated from the group early on in their trek. The Lady Be Good and the story of its crew serve as a poignant reminder of the sacrifices made during World War II and the unforgiving nature of war. The discovery of the bomber, decades after its disappearance, is a testament to the enduring power of hope, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. It's a story etched in the sands of time, a whisper from the past that continues to echo today. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember the Lady Be Good and its brave crew, lost but not forgotten. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the soft glow of lamplight in a quiet Parisian atelier. It's the late 1930s and the world is teetering on the brink of war. Our story centers around a man named Han van Meegeren, not a soldier, not a politician, but an artist, a forger to be precise. Now, Han wasn't just any forger. He was a master of his craft, painstakingly recreating the styles of the Dutch masters, particularly Johannes Vermeer. He felt scorned by the art world, his own original work dismissed as uninspired, derivative. In his bitterness, he vowed to prove them wrong, to create forgeries so convincing they would fool even the most discerning eyes. He dedicated years to studying Vermeer's techniques, grinding pigments by hand, using the same types of canvas, even baking his finished paintings to simulate the effects of centuries of aging. His forgeries were so good, they began to circulate among collectors and museums, each sale a quiet act of rebellion against the critics who had dismissed him. But the world was changing, darkening. The Nazi regime rose to power in Germany, and with it, a systematic looting of art began across Europe. Masterpieces vanished from Jewish homes, museums, and private collections. Destined for Hitler's planned Führer Museum in Linz, or for the personal collections of high-ranking Nazi officials like Hermann Göring. Paris fell in 1940, and the art world held its breath. The Nazis arrived, not just as conquerors, but as ravenous art collectors. They scoured the city, their agents compiling lists of valuable artworks, ready to be seized and shipped back to Germany. This is where Han van Meegeren's story takes an unexpected turn. A genuine Vermeer, Christ and the Adulteress, had been located in France. It was considered one of the most important Vermeers in existence, and Göring himself wanted it. Through a complex web of intermediaries, Goering acquired the painting, a painting unknowingly to him that was one of Hann's forgeries. After the war, the Allies began the monumental task of recovering stolen art. They traced Christ and the adulteress back to Goering, and from Goering back to Han van Meegeren. He was arrested and charged with collaboration, with selling a Dutch national treasure to the enemy. Now, this was a serious crime, potentially punishable by death. But Han had a secret that could save his life, and perhaps more than that. In a moment of audacious brilliance, he confessed, not to collaboration but to forgery. He declared that the Vermeer Goering had bought was not a genuine masterpiece, but a painting he, Han van Meegeren, had created himself. Claimed to have forged numerous other Vermeers as well. At first, no one believed him. How could this obscure artist have fooled the art world so completely? To prove his claim, Han, under police guard, painted another Vermeer in his prison cell, a scene of Jesus among the doctors. It was a painstaking process, but slowly, meticulously, a new Vermeer emerged, convincing even the most skeptical observers. Han van Meegeren became an instant sensation, a national hero. He had fooled Goering. He had, in a twisted way, protected a real Vermeer and countless other masterpieces from falling into Nazi hands by providing them with convincing but ultimately worthless substitutes. While he wasn't exactly saving them in a noble way, his forgeries were acting as bait. The Nazis believed they were acquiring the real thing, so they stopped looking as hard. While he was still charged with forgery and fraud, his sentence was relatively light. He became a celebrity, his story a symbol of Dutch defiance against Nazi occupation. He died a few months after being released from prison, a complex figure, a flawed genius, a forger who, perhaps unintentionally, played a crucial role in preserving some of the world's most treasured art. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember Han van Meegeren, the artist who turned deception into a form of preservation, a testament to the enduring power of art and the unexpected ways heroes can emerge in even the darkest of times. Sleep well. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine Poland in the early days of World War II. The country, once so vibrant, was now under the iron fist of Nazi occupation. Life was a constant struggle, filled with fear and uncertainty. But even in the darkest of times, acts of extraordinary courage could bloom. Tonight, I want to tell you about one such act, a quiet rebellion led by a brilliant and compassionate doctor. His name was Dr. Eugene Lazowski. Eugene Lazowski was a physician stationed in Rozwodow, a small town in southeastern Poland. He was a quiet man, known for his dedication to his patients. But Dr. Lazowski also possessed a deep sense of patriotism and an unwavering commitment to helping his fellow Poles. He couldn't stand idly by as the Nazis systematically persecuted and murdered his people. One of the Nazis' most effective tools of oppression was disease. They used the fear of epidemics, especially typhus, to justify rounding up people and sending them to concentration camps. Typhus, a highly contagious disease spread by lice, was particularly rampant in the overcrowded and unsanitary conditions created by the war. A single confirmed case could lead to the quarantine, or worse, the annihilation of entire villages. Dr. Lazowski, along with his friend and fellow doctor, Dr. Stanislaw Maciulewicz, devised a daring plan. They knew that a certain strain of dead bacteria, when injected into a person, would produce a false positive result for typhus in the Weil-Felix test, the standard diagnostic test of the time. It wouldn't make the person sick. It would simply trick the test. So, using this knowledge, they secretly began injecting healthy individuals with this dead bacteria. They targeted people who were at risk of being deported to forced labor camps, Jewish people hiding from the Nazis, and members of the Polish resistance. When the Nazis came to test the population, these individuals would test positive for typhus. The result was astonishing. The Nazis, terrified of contracting typhus, declared the areas where Dr. Lazowski was practicing to be under quarantine. They sealed off entire villages, preventing further deportations and forced labor. Dr. Lazowski and Dr. Maciulewicz had effectively created a fake typhus epidemic, a phantom disease that shielded thousands from the horrors of the Holocaust. Of course, this was an incredibly risky undertaking. One slip-up could expose their deception and lead to their execution, along with the people they were trying to protect. They had to be meticulous in their work, carefully controlling the spread of the epidemic and keeping it from spiraling out of control. They even had to convince the local population to play along, to act sick, and avoid contact with the authorities. Dr. Lazowski and Dr. Matulewicz maintained their charade for years, carefully managing the false epidemic and constantly fearing discovery. They relied on their medical expertise, their ingenuity, and the unwavering support of the local community. They forged documents, spread misinformation, and even manipulated the Nazi health officials who came to investigate the outbreak. The risk was ever present. The fear of being discovered hung over them like a dark cloud, but they persevered, driven by their deep sense of moral obligation and their unwavering belief in the power of hope. Their actions, though born of desperation, were an act of extraordinary defiance, a testament to the human spirit's ability to find light even in the darkest of times. After the war, Dr. Lazowski emigrated to the United States, where he continued his medical practice. He kept his wartime activities a secret for many years, fearing repercussions. It wasn't until much later in his life that he finally revealed the full story of his daring deception. He was hailed as a hero, a true savior who had risked his life to save thousands of others. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember the story of Dr. Eugene Lazowski, the Polish doctor who faked a typhus epidemic to save thousands. Let his courage and compassion inspire you, and let his story remind you that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, hope can always be found. Remember that even one person, with courage and determination, can make a world of difference. Sleep well. Close your eyes for a moment and let your mind drift back to a time of shadows, of war, of uncertainty hanging heavy in the air, specifically to the heart of Europe during World War II. Imagine the Swiss Alps, majestic and snow-capped, a natural fortress of neutrality, seemingly untouched by the conflict raging below. But appearances, as they often do, can be deceiving. In the shadow of these towering peaks nestled a small village. Let's call it Grindelwald, though its true name is less important than the spirit it embodied. Life in Grindelwald was simple, governed by the rhythm of the seasons. Farming, wood carving, and a quiet reverence for the mountains defined their days. They were a people who valued peace, who had maintained their neutrality for centuries, clinging to their independence like Edelweiss to a rocky crag. But even in this tranquil haven, the war's long fingers reached. The rumble of distant bombers became a familiar sound, a grim reminder of the world beyond their peaceful valley. And sometimes those bombers didn't just fly overhead. Sometimes they limped, sputtered, and crashed. The first airman arrived unexpectedly. A young American pilot, his B-17 riddled with flak, had managed to nurse his crippled plane towards Switzerland. Bailing out over the mountains, he parachuted to safety, landing bruised and disoriented near Grindelwald. The villagers, initially hesitant, found him, a scared, injured boy far from home. Now Switzerland's neutrality was a complex dance. Officially, they were required to intern any foreign military personnel who entered their territory. This meant confinement in camps, often for the duration of the war. But the people of Grindelwald, they saw something beyond the uniform, beyond the official policy. They saw a human being in need. And so, a quiet conspiracy began. The pilot was hidden, fed, and cared for. The village doctor tended to his injuries. The local pastor offered solace. The news of the downed airman spread like wildfire through the village, whispered in hushed tones, a secret shared by all. This first act of kindness became a precedent. More airmen followed, British, Canadian, Australian, even a few free French. Each arrival presented a new challenge, a new risk. The villagers developed a sophisticated system of concealment. Empty barns became temporary shelters. Attics and cellars were transformed into hidden rooms. The airmen were given civilian clothes, taught basic Swiss-German phrases, and integrated, as much as possible, into the life of the village. The children of Grindelwald became adept at spotting strangers, at diverting attention, at keeping secrets. They understood, in their innocent way, the importance of what they were doing. It was a game of life and death, played out against the backdrop of their peaceful village. The German authorities, of course, were not blind. They suspected that Grindelwald was harboring allied airmen. There were inspections, interrogations, and thinly veiled threats, but the villagers remained steadfast, united in their defiance. They protected their guests with a quiet determination, a courage born not of bravado, but of simple human decency. The airmen, in turn, were deeply moved by the villagers' selflessness. They became part of the community, helping with farm work, sharing stories, and offering what skills they possessed. Bonds of friendship were forged, bonds that transcended nationality and language. These were not just men being hidden, they were men being embraced. As the war drew to a close, the number of airmen in Grindelwald grew. The village became a haven, a sanctuary in a world gone mad. When liberation finally came, the airmen emerged from their hiding places, blinking in the sunlight, greeted by the cheers of the villagers. They returned home, forever grateful for the kindness they had received in Grindelwald. They never forgot the faces of those who had risked everything to save them. The story of Grindelwald became a legend, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the enduring human spirit. And so, let the memory of Grindelwald linger in your mind. A small village, high in the Alps, that dared to defy the darkness and offer a beacon of hope in a time of despair. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity can prevail. Sleep well. Let me tell you about the Battle of Los Angeles, the night the US fought phantoms. This is a fascinating topic. Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet corner of history. Tonight, let's drift away to a place that tested the very limits of human ingenuity and spirit, Colditz Castle. It's a name whispered with a mix of awe and respect, synonymous with daring escapes and unwavering resolve. But the story of Colditz is so much more than just tunnels and bravery. It's a tapestry woven with meticulous planning, unexpected camaraderie, and a relentless pursuit of freedom. Imagine, if you will, a formidable fortress perched high on a rocky outcrop in Saxony, Germany. Colditz Castle, with its thick stone walls, imposing towers, and sheer drops, had been deemed escape-proof. It was intended to house the Allied officers who had repeatedly attempted to escape from other prisoner-of-war camps, the incorrigibles, as the Germans called them. The logic was simple. If anyone could escape, these were the men. But what the Germans perhaps underestimated was the indomitable spirit of these officers. They came from various Allied nations, British, French, Dutch, Polish, and more, each bringing their unique skills and experiences to the table. Colditz quickly became a melting pot of ingenuity. One of the most captivating aspects of Colditz was the sheer creativity employed in the escape attempts. It wasn't enough to simply dig a tunnel. The prisoners needed to find innovative ways to conceal their activities. They used everything at their disposal. Bedboards became digging tools, floorboards became trapdoors, and stolen German uniforms became disguises. Take, for example, the story of the Colditz glider. This wasn't just a whimsical idea, it was a meticulously planned and executed engineering feat. Two British officers, Jack Best and Bill Goldfinch, conceived the idea of building a glider within the confines of the castle attic. Using smuggled materials, including bedsheets and floorboards, they secretly constructed a two-man glider, hoping to fly it over the castle walls and to freedom. Although the war ended before the glider could be launched, the sheer audacity of the plan is breathtaking. Then there were the tunnels. The most famous, perhaps, was the French tunnel, started in the French sector of the castle. Digging a tunnel under the noses of the guards required incredible organization and secrecy. Ferret officers, as they were known, were tasked with detecting any signs of German surveillance. Stooges would create diversions to distract the guards, while the digging teams worked tirelessly underground. The tunnels weren't just holes in the ground, they were marvels of engineering. They were shored up with wooden beams to prevent collapse, ventilated with makeshift pumps, and even lit with stolen electricity. The earth removed from the tunnels was carefully concealed, often spread in the attic, or used to fill empty spaces in the castle grounds. But the escape attempts weren't always successful. Many were thwarted by alert guards, unexpected collapses, or simply bad luck. The prisoners faced constant danger, not just from the Germans, but also from the risk of being betrayed by fellow prisoners. There were informers within the ranks, adding another layer of complexity to the already challenging situation. Yet, even in failure, there was a sense of triumph. Each escape attempt, successful or not, was a blow to German morale and a testament to the prisoners' unyielding determination. It showed that even in the most oppressive circumstances, the human spirit could not be completely crushed. Beyond the daring escapes, the story of Colditz is also about the bonds forged between men from different nations, united by a common desire for freedom. They shared food, resources, and information, supporting each other through the hardships of captivity. They organized classes, lectures, and even theatrical performances to keep their minds sharp and their spirits high. Colditz became a microcosm of Allied unity, a symbol of resistance against tyranny. And so, as we drift off to sleep tonight, let us remember the men of Colditz, not just for their bravery and ingenuity, but for their unwavering hope, their resilience in the face of adversity, and their enduring belief in the power of the human spirit. Their story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can always find a way to shine through. Sweet dreams. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly between continents. Now, picture the forests of the American Northwest, shrouded in mist and ancient trees. It's a quiet scene, isn't it? Peaceful. But even in the quietest of places, history can whisper secrets. Secrets like the story of the Japanese balloon bombs, a strange and largely forgotten threat from the Second World War. As the tide of war turned against Japan in the latter half of World War II, resources dwindled and desperation grew. Conventional bombing raids against the American mainland seemed impossible given the immense distance and the US formidable air defenses. So Japanese military scientists, ever resourceful, devised a novel, almost whimsical plan to harness the power of the jet stream. This high-altitude wind current, they believed, could carry large balloons laden with explosives all the way across the Pacific to North America. The project, known as *Fugo, meaning wind ship, was audacious in its simplicity. The balloons themselves were enormous, some stretching over 30 feet in diameter. They were made of thin, strong paper, painstakingly glued together by schoolchildren and young women conscripted into the war effort. Imagine them, these young hands carefully piecing together sheets of paper, unaware of the destructive power their creation would eventually unleash. Each balloon carried a payload of incendiary and high-explosive bombs designed to ignite the forests of the American Northwest, creating wildfires that would disrupt the war effort, divert resources, and sow fear among the civilian population. A complex system of altitude control was designed. As the balloon ascended or descended, it would automatically release sandbags or drop bombs to maintain its buoyancy at the optimal height for the jet stream. It was an ingenious, if somewhat haphazard, piece of engineering. The first balloons were launched in November 1944. For months, they floated silently across the Pacific, carried by the invisible currents of the jet stream. The American government, aware of the potential threat, imposed a strict news blackout. They didn't want to cause panic, nor did they want to give the Japanese any indication of the bomb's success or failure. Imagine the tension, the uncertainty, as reports trickled in of strange objects falling from the sky, exploding in remote areas. Several balloons landed in the United States and Canada. Some exploded harmlessly in sparsely populated areas. Others caused small brush fires. But the only fatalities directly attributed to the balloon bombs occurred in May 1945, near Bly, Oregon. A woman and 5 children, on a Sunday school outing, stumbled upon a downed balloon. As they approached it, the bomb detonated, killing them instantly. It was a tragic, needless loss of life. The Fugo project was ultimately a failure. Of the thousands of balloons launched, only a small percentage reached North America. And of those that did, the damage they caused was minimal. The American news blackout, while effective in preventing panic, also meant that the Japanese never knew the extent of their failure. They continued launching balloons until April 1945, when the project was finally abandoned. After the war, the story of the balloon bombs slowly faded from public memory. Perhaps it was the relatively small impact, or perhaps it was the desire to move on from the horrors of war. But the Fugo Asterisk project remains a fascinating footnote in the history of World War II, a testament to human ingenuity, both for good and for ill, a reminder that even the most outlandish ideas can be pursued in times of desperation, and a solemn reminder of the innocent lives lost, even in the most remote corners of the world. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember the whispers of the wind, carrying secrets across the ocean. Remember the young hands that crafted these strange weapons and the tragic loss of life in the forests of Oregon. And remember that even in the darkest of times, there is always a story waiting to be told. Sweet dreams. All right, settle in, make yourself comfortable. Tonight, we're going back in time to a place called Dunkirk in the year 1940. Picture this: Europe is engulfed in the chaos of World War II. The German army, a relentless, unstoppable force, has swept across France with frightening speed. British, French, Belgian, and Canadian soldiers, hundreds of thousands of them, are trapped, cut off from their supply lines, surrounded by the enemy, and pinned against the beaches of Dunkirk. The situation was bleak. Defeat seemed inevitable. The beaches became a desperate refuge, a sandy prison where men huddled together, exhausted, hungry, and terrified. They were easy targets for the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, which rained down bombs and strafed the beaches relentlessly. Every day brought more casualties, more despair. Back in Britain, the mood was grim. The government, led by Winston Churchill, knew that if these men were lost, Britain itself might fall. A rescue operation was launched, codenamed Operation Dynamo. But the Royal Navy, stretched thin across the globe, simply didn't have enough ships to evacuate so many men. The big destroyers, the powerful warships, they could only take so many at a time, and they were vulnerable to attack. That's where the miracle comes in. In a moment of inspired, almost desperate thinking, the British government issued a call to its citizens. A call for ordinary people, the owners of boats big and small, to sail across the English Channel and help bring the soldiers home. Imagine that call going out. Think of the pub conversations, the worried faces around kitchen tables. Fishermen, weekend sailors, ferry operators, even owners of pleasure craft. They all heard the call. They knew the dangers. They knew the risks. The channel was treacherous, the skies were filled with enemy aircraft, and the beaches were a scene of unimaginable chaos. But they answered anyway. They set out in a motley armada, a flotilla of civilian vessels unlike anything seen before or since. There were fishing boats, pleasure yachts, river cruisers, lifeboats, even rowing boats. Anything that could float and carry a few men was pressed into service. These weren't seasoned sailors trained in combat. These were ordinary citizens, driven by a sense of duty and a determination to save their countrymen. The journey across the channel was perilous. The boats were small and vulnerable, tossed about by the waves. German aircraft attacked relentlessly, and many boats were sunk or damaged. But still, they pressed on, guided by the smoke rising from the burning city of Dunkirk. When they arrived at the beaches, the scene was overwhelming. Thousands of exhausted, desperate soldiers were waiting to be rescued. The larger ships couldn't get close to the shore, so the smaller boats were crucial. They ferried the men from the beaches to the larger ships, braving the waves and the enemy fire. The little boats, the little ships of Dunkirk, as they became known, worked tirelessly day and night. They were crewed by ordinary people, fathers, sons, brothers, neighbors, who risked their lives to save the soldiers. Many of the boats were damaged, some were sunk, but still they kept going back for more. The evacuation lasted for 9 days. By the time it was over 338,000 soldiers had been rescued. A staggering number, a true miracle. While much equipment was lost, the men were saved. Saved to fight another day, saved to eventually liberate Europe. The miracle of Dunkirk wasn't just about the number of men rescued. It was about the spirit of the British people. It was about their courage, their resilience, and their willingness to sacrifice everything for their country. It showed the world that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail. It was a testament to the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So close your eyes now and remember the little ships of Dunkirk, bobbing on the waves, carrying hope across the channel. Remember the ordinary people who answered the call and helped to save an army. Sweet dreams. All right, settle in, make yourself comfortable. Tonight, we're going to drift back in time to a cold, grey December in 1944. The Battle of the Bulge was raging, a desperate German offensive aimed at splitting the Allied forces. A last gasp, really. But amidst the chaos and the carnage, there were moments of incredible bravery and sometimes unbelievable luck. Tonight's story is one of those moments, the tale of a single American soldier who almost impossibly captured an entire German unit. His name was Private First Class Robert D. Maxwell. He wasn't a seasoned veteran, not some hardened Rambo figure. He was just a guy barely out of his teens, serving with the 70th Infantry Division, known as the Trailblazers. This division, relatively new to the European theater, found itself thrust into the thick of the Ardennes forest, facing the full fury of the German advance. The weather was brutal: snow, ice, and a bone-chilling cold that seeped into everything. Maxwell's unit was dug in near the French-German border, holding a defensive position. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. Days blurred into a relentless cycle of shelling, skirmishes, and the constant, gnawing fear of being overrun. Imagine the scene: the stark white landscape, the skeletal trees reaching towards the sky, the muffled sounds of distant artillery fire. One particularly harsh morning, Maxwell was on patrol with a small squad. They were scouting ahead, trying to determine the enemy's strength and movements. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a German unit, not just a handful of soldiers, but a whole platoon, perhaps even a company. The Germans, equally surprised, opened fire. The Americans were caught in a deadly crossfire. Maxwell's squad scattered, seeking what little cover they could find. Many were wounded, some killed. Maxwell himself was separated from the others, alone and exposed. He knew he was in a precarious situation. He could try to escape, to rejoin his unit, but he also knew that the Germans would likely continue their advance, potentially overwhelming the American lines. Now here's where the story takes a truly remarkable turn. Instead of retreating, instead of surrendering, Maxwell decided to bluff. He had a single Browning automatic rifle, or bar, a powerful weapon, but hardly enough to take on an entire German unit. But he also had something else: audacity. He moved to a more advantageous position, using the terrain to his advantage. He found a small rise, a patch of woods that offered some concealment. And then he started firing. He didn't just fire randomly, he fired in bursts, moving from position to position, creating the illusion of a much larger force. He yelled commands, as if directing other soldiers. He made it sound like a full-scale counterattack was underway. The Germans, disoriented and unsure of the Americans' strength, hesitated. They had expected to encounter only light resistance, not a coordinated assault. Maxwell's bluff was working. He kept up the charade for what must have felt like an eternity, firing, moving, yelling, creating chaos and confusion. The Germans, convinced they were facing a much larger force, began to waver. Finally, Maxwell decided to push his luck even further. He stood up, exposed, and shouted at the top of his lungs, demanding their surrender. He threatened them with artillery strikes, with tanks, with everything he could think of. He painted a picture of overwhelming American power, ready to crush them. And unbelievably, it worked. The German unit, demoralized, confused, and fearing the consequences of further resistance, surrendered. They laid down their arms and waited to be taken prisoner. Maxwell alone had captured an entire German unit. Later, when reinforcements arrived, they were stunned by what they found. Maxwell, covered in snow and grime, stood guard over a large group of German prisoners. He had managed to pull off the impossible. For his incredible bravery and audacity, Private First Class Robert D. Maxwell was awarded the Medal of Honor. His story is a testament to the power of courage, resourcefulness, and a little bit of luck in the face of overwhelming odds. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, even when all seems lost, one person can make a difference. And now, close your eyes and let that image of unwavering courage lull you to sleep. Good night. Close your eyes now, breathe deeply, and let me tell you a story of adventure, courage, and unlikely alliances, a story whispered in the winds above the mountains of China during the dark days of World War II. This is the tale of the Flying Tigers. Before America officially entered the war, even before Pearl Harbor, the nation of China was already locked in a desperate struggle against the invading forces of Japan. The Japanese military machine was relentless, pushing further and further into Chinese territory, threatening to overwhelm the country entirely. The Chinese government, under Chiang Kai-shek, was desperate for help. They needed planes, they needed pilots, they needed something to stem the tide of the Japanese advance. And so, they turned to the United States. Now, officially, America was still neutral. But President Roosevelt, recognizing the growing threat of Japanese expansionism, was willing to bend the rules a little. Enter Claire Lee Chennault. A retired U.S. Army Air Corps captain, Chennault was a brilliant, though somewhat unorthodox, military strategist. He believed passionately in the potential of air power and had spent years studying Japanese aerial tactics. He was also convinced that the American P-40 Warhawk, though considered outdated by some, could be effectively used against the faster, more maneuverable Japanese aircraft if flown correctly. Chennault persuaded the Chinese government to hire him as an aviation advisor. His real mission, though, was much bigger: to recruit American pilots and mechanics to form a volunteer air force to defend China. And so quietly, under the guise of a private company called the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company, recruitment began. Pilots, mechanics, and support personnel, all experienced and highly skilled, were offered lucrative contracts, far more than they could earn in the U.S. Army Air Corps. They were promised adventure, a chance to fight for a worthy cause, and the opportunity to fly. These men came from all walks of life. Some were seasoned veterans, eager for action. Others were young, idealistic adventurers, drawn to the romantic allure of flying in a foreign land. They were a motley crew, but they shared a common thread: a thirst for excitement and a willingness to risk their lives for a country they barely knew. They were officially known as the American Volunteer Group, or AVG, but they soon earned a much more fearsome and memorable nickname: the Flying Tigers. This came from their distinctive shark-mouthed P-40 Warhawks. Chennault, remembering the artwork often seen on British aircraft, suggested the design to inspire fear in the enemy, and it worked. The Flying Tigers were divided into 3 squadrons: the Adam and Eves, the Panda Bears, and the Hells Angels. They were stationed in Kunming, a city in southwestern China, and their mission was to defend the vital supply route known as the Burma Road, as well as Chinese cities from Japanese bombing raids. Chennault's innovative tactics were key to their success. He developed a system of early warning using a network of ground observers, allowing the Tigers to intercept Japanese aircraft before they could reach their targets. He also emphasized teamwork and aggressive flying, teaching his pilots how to exploit the weaknesses of the Japanese planes. Despite being outnumbered and facing a technologically superior enemy, the Flying Tigers achieved remarkable results. They shot down hundreds of Japanese aircraft, disrupted enemy supply lines, and provided a much-needed boost to Chinese morale. Their exploits became legendary, inspiring hope in a country ravaged by war. But their time together was relatively short. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, America officially entered the war, and the AVG was disbanded in July 1942. Many of the pilots joined the U.S. Army Air Forces, continuing to fight in the China-Burma-India theater. The legacy of the Flying Tigers lives on. They represent a time of courage and ingenuity, a testament to the power of international cooperation in the face of adversity. They were a small group of brave men who made a big difference, proving that even in the darkest of times, hope can take flight. So, close your eyes a little tighter now, feel the gentle breeze on your face, and remember the story of the Flying Tigers. A story of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring spirit of freedom. Sweet dreams. Close your eyes, imagine the vast white expanse of the Arctic, a land of endless ice and snow where the wind howls like a lonely wolf. During the Second World War, while battles raged across Europe and the Pacific, a quieter, more secretive conflict unfolded here. a hidden war for control of the weather. It's a tale of isolated outposts, clandestine operations, and the vital importance of knowing what the skies above held in store. The Arctic wasn't just a frozen wasteland, it was a crucial strategic location. The weather systems that originated there directly influenced the battlefields of Europe. Predicting these weather patterns accurately could give one side a significant advantage, allowing for better planned bombing raids, naval operations, and troop movements. Imagine trying to plan a D-Day invasion without knowing if a massive storm was brewing. Accurate forecasting was literally a matter of life and death. Both Germany and the Allied forces understood this, so they embarked on a shadowy game of cat and mouse, establishing hidden weather stations and bases across the Arctic archipelagos. These weren't grand, fortified installations. They were often small, rudimentary structures, sometimes little more than huts buried in the snow, manned by a handful of dedicated, or perhaps desperate souls. Imagine the loneliness, the constant cold, the gnawing fear of discovery. The Germans, in particular, were very active. They established a series of clandestine weather stations, codenamed things like Hordegen, Cutlass, and Edelweiss. These stations were often supplied by U-boats, which would brave the treacherous Arctic waters under the cover of darkness. The crew would unload supplies, equipment, and personnel, all while trying to avoid detection by Allied patrols. It was a dangerous game, playing hide-and-seek in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. One notable example was the Hordegen station, located on Nordislandet, an island in the Svalbard archipelago. It was the last German surface unit to surrender in World War II, not giving up until several months after the official end of the war. Can you imagine the dedication, or perhaps the isolation-induced delusion, required to continue operating a weather station long after everyone else had gone home? They remained, diligently recording temperatures, wind speeds, and cloud formations, completely unaware that the war was over. The Allies, of course, weren't passive observers. They launched their own operations to disrupt German weather forecasting efforts. These included commando raids to destroy German stations, as well as establishing their own network of observation posts. The Norwegian resistance played a crucial role in these operations, providing invaluable local knowledge and support. Imagine the bravery of those Norwegian fishermen and hunters, risking their lives to help the Allies against the Nazi occupation. One particularly daring operation involved the destruction of a German weather station on Bear Island, located halfway between Norway and Svalbard. A British commando unit landed on the island under cover of darkness and successfully destroyed the station, denying the Germans vital weather data. It was a small victory, perhaps, but a significant one in the grand scheme of the war. The conditions at these Arctic outposts were brutal. Blizzards could rage for days, cutting off communication and supplies. The constant darkness of the polar winter could take a toll on mental health, and the threat of polar bears was ever present. Imagine the psychological strain of living in such an isolated and hostile environment, knowing that your survival depended on your ability to withstand the elements and avoid detection. The data collected by these weather stations, both German and Allied, was invaluable. It helped to shape military strategy, influence the course of battles, and ultimately contribute to the Allied victory. The secret war in the Arctic was a testament to the importance of information, even in the most remote and inhospitable corners of the world. It's a reminder that even seemingly insignificant details can have a profound impact on the course of history. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember the brave men who braved the Arctic cold, the hidden bases, and the silent struggle for control of the weather. It's a story of dedication, resilience, and the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. Sweet dreams. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let your mind drift back to a time of shadows and struggle, the Second World War. Tonight, we're going to explore a fascinating and rather unexpected chapter of that conflict, a story of survival, pragmatism, and a very unlikely alliance in the war-torn lands of Yugoslavia. Before the storm clouds of war gathered, Yugoslavia was a kingdom, a patchwork of cultures and ethnicities held together by King Alexander. But in 1941, Nazi Germany, with its insatiable hunger for conquest, turned its gaze southward. Yugoslavia, strategically important, was brutally invaded and dismembered. The kingdom collapsed, and from the ashes, resistance was born. Now within Yugoslavia, two main resistance movements emerged. On one side were the Chetniks, largely Serbian royalists, led by Draža Mihailović. They initially had allied support, primarily from the British. On the other side, a new force was rising, a group of communist partisans led by Josip Broz Tito. Tito, a Croat, was a seasoned revolutionary, a man of steely resolve and unwavering dedication to his cause. He envisioned a socialist Yugoslavia, free from ethnic divisions and foreign domination. Initially, the Allies, particularly the British, backed Mihailović and the Chetniks. It seemed logical. They were royalists, anti-communist, and aligned with the pre-war order. But as the war dragged on, reports began to filter through disturbing reports. Reports of Chetnik collaboration with the occupying forces, tactical alliances made to fight the communist partisans rather than the Germans. It was a complicated situation, a brutal civil war raging within a larger war. Meanwhile, Tito's partisans were proving to be remarkably effective fighters. They harassed the Germans relentlessly, disrupting supply lines, ambushing patrols, and tying down significant numbers of enemy troops. They liberated towns and villages, establishing liberated territories, offering a glimpse of the future socialist Yugoslavia they envisioned. And crucially, unlike the Chetniks, they were primarily focused on fighting the Germans and their collaborators. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. British intelligence officers, parachuted into Yugoslavia to assess the situation on the ground, sent back increasingly critical reports about the Chetniks and glowing endorsements of Tito's partisans. These officers witnessed firsthand the partisans' bravery, their effectiveness, and their unwavering commitment to fighting the Axis powers. The shift in Allied policy was a gradual process, driven by pragmatism and a growing understanding of the complex realities on the ground. The British, led by Winston Churchill, began to realize that supporting Tito, despite his communist ideology, was the most effective way to defeat the Germans in Yugoslavia. It wasn't about ideology, it was about winning the war. In 1943, the Tehran Conference, a meeting between Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, marked a turning point. The Allies officially recognized Tito's partisans as the primary resistance force in Yugoslavia. Support was shifted. Weapons, supplies, and advisors began to flow to Tito's forces. The Chetniks, once the darlings of the Allied cause, were gradually sidelined, their support dwindling until it eventually disappeared altogether. This alliance was, to say the least, unusual. Here were the capitalist democracies of the West, aligning themselves with a communist revolutionary. It was a marriage of convenience, a partnership forged in the crucible of war, but it proved to be a remarkably successful partnership. With Allied support, Tito's partisans grew stronger and more effective. They tied down hundreds of thousands of German troops, preventing them from being deployed on other fronts, such as the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union or the Western Front after D-Day. By the end of the war, Tito's partisans had liberated Yugoslavia largely on their own. They had proven their mettle, their resilience, and their unwavering dedication to their cause. And when the dust settled, Tito emerged as the undisputed leader of a new, socialist Yugoslavia, a nation that would chart its own independent course, even defying the Soviet Union in later years. The alliance between Tito and the Allies was a testament to the power of pragmatism, a recognition that in times of war, unlikely alliances can be forged in the pursuit of a common goal. It was a complex and often controversial chapter of World War II, but one that ultimately played a significant role in the defeat of Nazi Germany and the shaping of post-war Europe. Now, let the images of this story fade gently as you drift off to sleep. Rest well. Close your eyes for a moment Imagine the vast, shimmering expanse of the North African desert. The year is 1941, and the world is engulfed in war. But here, under the scorching sun, a small, unlikely garrison is about to write themselves into legend. They were the defenders of Tobruk, a crucial port city in Libya, and they would soon be known by a rather peculiar, though ultimately respected, name, the Rats of Tobruk. The strategic importance of Tobruk cannot be overstated. It was a vital supply hub, a gateway for the Allied forces to maintain their foothold in North Africa and prevent the Axis powers, primarily Germany and Italy, from controlling the entire region. To lose Tobruk would mean losing a crucial advantage, potentially jeopardizing the entire war effort in the Mediterranean. As the relentless Afrika Korps, under the command of the Desert Fox himself, Erwin Rommel, swept across North Africa, the Allied forces were pushed back. Tobruk, however, held firm. Entrenched within its fortified perimeter were soldiers from Australia, Britain, India, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, a truly international force, united in their determination to resist. The siege began in April 1941, and it was brutal. Day after day, the defenders endured relentless artillery bombardments, air raids, and infantry assaults. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, water was scarce, and disease was a constant threat. But despite the hardships, the Rats of Tobruk refused to yield. Why rats? Well, it wasn't a term of endearment initially. It was coined by the German propagandists, who sought to portray the defenders as vermin, hiding in holes and unwilling to face them in open battle. But the Allied soldiers, with their characteristic Australian larrikin spirit, embraced the name, turning it into a badge of honor. They scrawled Rats of Tobruk on their vehicles, their fortifications, and even on captured enemy equipment. It became a symbol of their resilience, their defiance, and their unwavering commitment to holding the line. Life inside the besieged city was a constant struggle for survival. The defenders lived in a network of trenches, bunkers, and underground tunnels, seeking shelter from the incessant bombing. They scavenged for food and water, repaired damaged equipment, and prepared for the next inevitable attack. Sleep was a luxury, and the constant stress took its toll. But amidst the hardship, there were also moments of camaraderie, of shared laughter, and of quiet courage. Soldiers shared stories, played cards, and wrote letters home, clinging to the hope of seeing their loved ones again. They formed close bonds with their comrades, relying on each other for support and encouragement in the face of unimaginable adversity. The Australians, in particular, were known for their resourcefulness and their ability to find humor in the darkest of situations. The defense of Tobruk was not just about holding a city, it was about buying time. Time for the Allied forces to regroup, to reinforce their positions, and to prepare for a counteroffensive. The Rats of Tobruk, by their stubborn resistance, disrupted Rommel's plans and prevented him from advancing further into Egypt, towards the vital Suez Canal. After months of relentless fighting, the siege of Tobruk was finally lifted in November 1941. Operation Crusader, a major Allied offensive, broke through the Axis lines and relieved the beleaguered garrison. The Rats of Tobruk had achieved the impossible. They had held a vital strategic location against overwhelming odds, and they had bought the Allies precious time to turn the tide of the war in North Africa. The sacrifices made by the Rats of Tobruk were immense. Many lost their lives, and many more were wounded. But their courage, their resilience, and their unwavering determination will never be forgotten. They became a symbol of hope and inspiration for the Allied cause, and their story continues to resonate today as a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the most extreme adversity. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember the Rats of Tobruk. Those brave soldiers who, against all odds, defended a desert fortress and helped to shape the course of history. Sleep well. Tonight, let's drift back in time to a world shadowed by war, a world where darkness threatened to extinguish the brightest lights of art and intellect. We're going to talk about a story of courage, ingenuity, and quiet heroism, the story of the WWII-era rescue mission. Imagine France in 1940. The swift and brutal German blitzkrieg had shattered the country, leaving it divided and occupied. Paris, once the vibrant heart of European culture, was now under Nazi control. Artists, writers, musicians, intellectuals, all those whose ideas and creations challenged the Nazi ideology were in grave danger. They were being hunted. Among these were figures you might recognize: Marc Chagall, the surrealist painter; Hannah Arendt, the brilliant political theorist; Max Ernst, another pioneer of surrealism; Heinrich Mann, the celebrated novelist and brother of Thomas Mann; and many, many others. These individuals were not soldiers, but their ideas, their art, their very existence represented a threat to the Nazi regime. News of this plight reached America, and it stirred the conscience of a few brave souls. One of them was Varian Fry, a Harvard-educated journalist and editor. Varian wasn't a spy or a soldier. He was, by all accounts, a rather unassuming man. But he possessed a fierce sense of justice and an unwavering belief in the power of ideas. In the summer of 1940, Fry embarked on a daring mission. He traveled to Marseille, a port city in the unoccupied zone of France, armed with a list of endangered intellectuals and a meager $3,000 strapped to his leg, a sum provided by the Emergency Rescue Committee, a private American organization. He was supposed to stay for just a few weeks, rescue a handful of people, and then return home. But the situation was far more dire than anyone had imagined. Marseille was a chaotic melting pot of refugees, spies, and desperate souls. Fry quickly realized that his initial plan was hopelessly inadequate. He needed help, and he found it in a remarkable network of volunteers, some American, some French, some from other European countries, all united by a common cause: to defy the Nazis and save lives. This network included Miriam Davenport, a young American art student who became Fry's invaluable assistant; Albert O. Hirschman, an economist who helped with smuggling operations; and Lisa Fitko, a resourceful woman who guided refugees on foot over the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain. They were an unlikely team, but they were fiercely dedicated. Fry and his team faced immense challenges. They had to navigate the treacherous waters of Vichy France, a puppet regime collaborating with the Nazis. They had to forge documents, secure visas, arrange secret transportation, all while evading the watchful eyes of the Gestapo and the French police. One of their most ingenious methods was smuggling refugees across the border into Spain. Lisa Fitko, known as Lisa the Smuggler, led small groups on foot through the rugged mountains, following a secret trail that she knew intimately. It was a perilous journey, fraught with danger, but it offered a chance at freedom. Another tactic involved securing exit visas and transit visas, often through bribery or sheer luck. Fry and his team cultivated relationships with corrupt officials and sympathetic diplomats, exploiting loopholes and bending the rules to their advantage. They even established workshops to create counterfeit documents, a risky but necessary undertaking. Over the course of 13 months, Varian Fry and his team managed to rescue approximately 2,000 people, including many of the most prominent artists and intellectuals of the time. They helped them escape to safety in America and other countries, where they could continue their work and contribute to the fight against fascism. Eventually, Fry's activities attracted too much attention. He was arrested by the French police and eventually expelled from the country in September 1941. He returned to America, but his story was largely forgotten for many years. It wasn't until after the war that Fry's heroism began to be recognized. He was posthumously honored by Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust memorial, as a righteous among the nations, the first American to receive this distinction. Today, his story stands as a testament to the power of individual courage and the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember Varian Fry and his remarkable team. Remember the artists and intellectuals they saved, the ideas they protected, and the hope they kept alive in a dark and desperate time. May their story inspire you to be brave, to be compassionate, and to never give up on the fight for freedom and justice. Good night. Close your eyes now and let your mind now drift back to a world at war. a world shrouded in secrets, whispered plans, and the ever-present danger of betrayal. Tonight, we're going to tell the tale of a man who walked a treacherous tightrope, a double agent who played a dangerous game for years, feeding the enemy lies. His name, well, his real name is less important than the role he played, a crucial cog in the Allied machinery of deception. Imagine, if you will, a bustling port city. Perhaps Hamburg or Bremen in the late 1930s. Our man, let's call him Frederick, is a businessman, seemingly unremarkable. He speaks fluent German, picked up during his childhood visits to relatives. He's well-educated, possessing a sharp mind and an even sharper understanding of human nature. But beneath the surface of this ordinary exterior lies a carefully cultivated secret. Frederick is a British agent, tasked with infiltrating German society and gathering intelligence. He starts small, cultivating contacts in the shipping industry, sharing drinks with dockworkers, listening to gossip in smoky bars. He gradually builds a network, learning about troop movements, cargo shipments, and whispers of new technologies. All this information is painstakingly relayed back to London, helping the Allies piece together the puzzle of German war preparations. But Frederick knows that merely gathering intelligence isn't enough. To truly be effective, he needs to gain the trust of the WWII German military intelligence. This is where the double game begins. He starts feeding them carefully crafted, seemingly valuable information that is actually misleading, or at best, only partially true. He reports on fictitious Allied troop movements, exaggerates the capabilities of certain weapon systems, and subtly steers German attention away from real strategic targets. It's a delicate dance. He has to be convincing, providing enough genuine-sounding information to maintain his credibility, while simultaneously ensuring that nothing he reveals actually harms the Allied war effort. He studies German military doctrine, understands their thought processes, and tailors his lies to fit their expectations. He anticipates their questions, prepares his answers, and practices his reactions. Every interaction is a performance, a carefully choreographed act designed to deceive. Years pass, the war erupts. Frederick's role becomes even more crucial. He is now a key conduit for disinformation, feeding the German war machine with a steady stream of strategic blunders. He reports on phantom Allied landings, diverting German troops to defend empty beaches. He exaggerates the damage inflicted by bombing raids, leading the Germans to overestimate their losses and underestimate their resilience. He even manages to plant false rumors about internal dissent within the British government, sowing seeds of paranoia and mistrust. The strain is immense. He lives under constant threat of exposure, knowing that one slip-up could cost him his life. He's isolated, unable to confide in anyone, constantly forced to maintain his facade. He misses his family, his friends, the simple pleasures of life. But he perseveres, driven by a deep sense of duty and an unwavering belief in the Allied cause. One of his most significant contributions involves convincing the Germans that the Allied invasion of Europe would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. This deception, meticulously crafted over months, involved a complex network of fake radio transmissions, planted documents, and carefully orchestrated leaks. The Germans swallowed the bait, diverting significant forces to Pas-de-Calais, leaving Normandy relatively lightly defended. D-Day arrives. The Allied troops land on the beaches of Normandy, facing far less resistance than anticipated. Frederick's years of deception have paid off, contributing significantly to the success of the invasion and ultimately to the Allied victory. After the war, Frederick quietly returns to civilian life. He never seeks recognition for his service, preferring to remain in the shadows. He carries the weight of his secrets with him, knowing that he played a pivotal role in shaping the course of history. His story, like so many others from that era, is a testament to the courage, sacrifice, and ingenuity of those who fought in the shadows, shaping the world we live in today. Now, rest easy, knowing that even in the darkest of times, there are those who fight for the light, one carefully crafted lie at a time. All right, settle in, make yourself comfortable. Tonight, we're going to travel back in time, all the way to the rugged mountains of Italy during the Second World War. We're not going to talk about major battles or famous generals tonight. Instead, we're going to tell a story, a whispered legend, really, about something far more unusual. Imagine the year is 1944. The Allied forces are slowly, painstakingly, pushing their way up the Italian peninsula. The fighting is brutal, the terrain unforgiving. German soldiers, many of them young and far from home, occupy small, isolated villages, clinging to every inch of ground. They're constantly on edge, fearing partisan attacks, Allied advances, and something else, something less tangible. The area we're focusing on is a particularly remote stretch of the Apennine Mountains. Steep slopes, thick forests, and hidden caves make it perfect for guerrilla warfare, but they also lend themselves to things that go bump in the night. The German soldiers began to whisper stories. At first, they were dismissed as nervous imaginings, the product of stress and fear. But the stories persisted, growing bolder, more unsettling. They spoke of a figure, a creature that haunted the mountains. They called him the Siegenmann the goat man. The stories varied, of course. Some claimed he was a wild hermit, driven mad by the war, who'd taken to wearing animal skins. Others whispered that he was a cursed soul, a shepherd who'd betrayed his village and was now doomed to roam the mountains as a half-man, half-goat. And then there were the stories that hinted at something older, something pagan and primal, awakened by the bloodshed. What all the stories had in common was the description of the Siegenmann. He was said to be incredibly strong, agile as a mountain goat, and utterly silent. He moved through the forests like a shadow, leaving no tracks. He was always watching, always lurking. The first incidents were minor. Equipment vanished from supply depots. Guard dogs were found mutilated, but no one heard a thing. Then came the night raids. Small groups of soldiers would be ambushed while patrolling the mountain paths, not by partisans, not by Allied troops, but by something far more savage. These attacks were different. They weren't about taking prisoners or capturing territory. They were about terror. Soldiers were found with their throats torn out, their bodies arranged in strange, ritualistic poses. Weapons were left untouched. It was as if the Siegenmann was making a statement, a warning. One particularly chilling tale involved a small observation post nestled high on a ridge. The soldiers stationed there, a group of hardened veterans, reported seeing a figure moving among the trees at night. They fired at it, but the figure vanished into the darkness. The next morning, they found a single, cloven hoof print outside their bunker, and scratched into the door, in what appeared to be dried blood, was a crude drawing of a goat's head. The fear spread like wildfire through the German ranks. Soldiers refused to patrol alone. They stayed close to their bunkers, eyes darting nervously at the surrounding forests. The Siegenmann became a symbol of the unknown horrors of war, a manifestation of their deepest fears. Of course, there were skeptics. Some officers dismissed the stories as morale-killing rumors, the product of war weariness and superstition. They ordered investigations, but nothing concrete was ever found. No body, no weapon, no definitive proof of the Siegenmann's existence. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the Siegenmann wasn't a real creature at all. Maybe he was a symbol, a legend, a way for these terrified soldiers to cope with the unimaginable horrors they were facing. Perhaps he was a composite of partisan activity, animal attacks, and the sheer psychological strain of constant warfare. Whatever the truth may be, the legend of the Siegenmann persists to this day. It's a reminder that war isn't just about battles and strategy. It's about the human cost, the fear, the uncertainty, and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of the darkness. So the next time you hear a strange sound in the woods or see a shadow flicker in the corner of your eye, just remember the Siegenmann of the Apennine Mountains. You never know what might be lurking out there. Sleep well. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the year is 1940. The sun sets over France, but it brings little comfort. The Nazi war machine has rolled through, leaving the country divided and occupied. A heavy silence hangs in the air, a silence broken only by the marching of German boots and the whispered anxieties of a defeated people. But within that silence, a spark ignited, a spark of resistance. This wasn't a grand army clashing on a battlefield. This was something far more subtle, far more dangerous: the French resistance. A network of ordinary people, farmers, teachers, housewives, students, all united by a single burning desire to liberate their homeland. They were the shadows in the night, the whispers in the crowd, the quiet defiance in the face of overwhelming force. At first, resistance was small, almost insignificant. A defiant gesture, refusing to speak German, discreetly tearing down Nazi propaganda posters, or helping Allied soldiers who had been separated from their units to evade capture. These early acts, seemingly minor, were crucial. They showed the occupiers that the spirit of France was not broken, that there were those who refused to submit. As the occupation tightened its grip, the resistance grew more organized. Groups began to form, often independent of each other, scattered across the country. These groups, with names like *Combat*, Liberation Sud*, and Franc-Tireur*, each had their own leadership and their own methods. Some focused on intelligence gathering, painstakingly collecting information about German troop movements, fortifications, and industrial production. This information, often passed on through elaborate networks of couriers, found its way to London, providing invaluable insights to the Allied war effort. Think of brave individuals cycling down country roads, their baskets filled not with groceries, but with coded messages hidden beneath loaves of bread or wrapped within skeins of yarn. Other groups specialized in sabotage. They targeted railway lines, bridges, factories producing war materials, and communication lines. These acts of sabotage, while risky, slowed the German war machine, disrupted supply lines, and forced the occupiers to divert resources to security, resources that could have been used on the Eastern Front or elsewhere. Imagine the tension, the careful planning, the silent approach in the dead of night, the quick placement of explosives, and the desperate escape before dawn. Espionage was another vital component of the resistance. Agents, often working undercover in German-controlled institutions, gathered intelligence from within the enemy's ranks. They infiltrated administrative offices, factories, and even military headquarters. This intelligence could range from the mundane, such as knowing the daily schedule of a particular officer, to the critical, such as learning about an impending raid or the location of a secret weapons depot. This information was then relayed to the Allies, helping them to plan their operations more effectively and to avoid costly mistakes. The risks were immense. Discovery meant torture, imprisonment, or execution. The Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, were ruthless in their pursuit of resistance members. Informers were everywhere, and trust was a precious commodity. Yet, despite the danger, the resistance continued to grow, fueled by a deep-seated love for their country and a burning hatred of the occupation. The resistance also played a crucial role in rescuing downed Allied airmen. These airmen, often injured and disoriented, were sheltered by resistance members, hidden in barns, attics, and cellars. They were provided with food, clothing, and medical care, and then smuggled through elaborate escape lines to neutral countries, such as Spain or Switzerland. This operation required incredible courage and resourcefulness, as it involved deceiving the German authorities and risking the lives of both the airmen and the resistance members. The resistance was not without its internal conflicts and disagreements. There were ideological differences between the various groups and disagreements about tactics and strategy. However, despite these differences, they were united in their goal of liberating France. As the war progressed, the resistance became increasingly important to the Allied war effort. They provided crucial intelligence, disrupted German operations, and helped to prepare the way for the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944. The story of the French resistance is a story of courage, resilience, and unwavering defiance. It is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure, and that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they are united by a common cause. So sleep peacefully, knowing that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the light of hope and resistance can never be truly extinguished. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the soft glow of candlelight dancing across walls adorned with honey-colored amber. Not just any amber, mind you, but intricately carved panels, mosaics, and sculptures, all shimmering with a warm, inviting light. This was the Amber Room, often called the eighth wonder of the world, a treasure of unimaginable beauty and value. Our story begins not in wartime darkness, but in the opulence of 18th century Prussia. King Frederick I, a man with a penchant for extravagance, commissioned the Amber Room in the early 1700s. It was meant to be a grand statement, a testament to his wealth and power. Sadly, he died before it was completed. His son, Frederick William I, a far more pragmatic ruler, wasn't quite as enamored with the room's artistic value. He saw it as an unnecessary expense. Now, Peter the Great, the Tsar of Russia, was a shrewd and ambitious leader. He and Frederick William I forged an alliance, a bond strengthened by shared political interests. In 1716, Frederick William I, in a gesture of goodwill, gifted the Amber Room to Peter the Great. Can you picture it? This magnificent creation, carefully disassembled and transporting to Russia, a symbol of friendship between two powerful nations. The Amber Room found its new home in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg. It was expanded and enhanced, becoming even more breathtaking under the watchful eye of Empress Elizabeth. Italian architect Bartolomeo Rastrelli, known for his Baroque masterpieces, redesigned the room, adding more amber, gold leaf, and precious stones. It was a dazzling display of artistry and craftsmanship, a place where sunlight seemed to become liquid gold. Fast forward to the dark days of World War II. In 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The Catherine Palace, located near the front lines, was under threat. Soviet curators desperately tried to dismantle and hide the Amber Room, but the fragile amber panels were too delicate to move quickly. They attempted to conceal it behind wallpaper, hoping to fool the invaders. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. The Nazis, specifically a unit specializing in art looting, discovered the Amber Room. They carefully disassembled it, piece by piece, and packed it into crates. These crates were then shipped to Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, in East Prussia. The Amber Room was reassembled and put on display in Königsberg Castle. For a brief period, it was once again open to the public, albeit under very different circumstances. As the war progressed, the Soviet Red Army advanced towards Königsberg. The city became a fortress, and the castle was heavily damaged by Allied bombing raids. In 1945, as the Soviets closed in, the Amber Room vanished. This is where the mystery truly begins. What happened to it? Numerous theories have emerged over the years. Some believe it was destroyed in the bombing raids. Others claim it was hidden in a secret underground bunker within the castle. Still others speculate that it was loaded onto a ship and sunk in the Baltic Sea. There are even tales of it being transporting to South America, hidden away by fleeing Nazis. The possibilities seem endless. Despite decades of searching and countless expeditions, the Amber Room has never been found. Fragments of the original Florentine mosaic were discovered in 1997, offering a glimmer of hope, but the bulk of the treasure remains lost. Perhaps it lies deep beneath the rubble of Königsberg Castle, forever entombed, or maybe it's hidden in a secret location, waiting to be rediscovered. The mystery of the Amber Room continues to fascinate and intrigue us. It serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of war and the enduring power of art. And as you drift off to sleep, remember the Amber Room, a symbol of beauty, loss, and the enduring human quest for the missing. A treasure lost to time, waiting to be found. Good night. Tonight, let's drift back in time to a place far away, a vast ocean churning with the fury of war. We're going to tell the story of a little ship, a destroyer called the USS Johnston, and the incredible courage of her crew. It's a story of sacrifice, of impossible odds, and of a spirit that refused to break, even when facing certain doom. The year is 1944. The Pacific Theater is ablaze. American forces are pushing relentlessly towards Japan, island hopping their way closer to the mainland. One of these pivotal moments was the Battle of Leyte Gulf, a sprawling, complex naval engagement considered by some to be the largest naval battle in history. The Johnston, designated DD-557, was a Fletcher-class destroyer, a workhorse of the American fleet. She wasn't a battleship or even a heavy cruiser. Destroyers were smaller, faster, meant to screen the larger ships, hunt submarines, and generally be the scrappy underdogs of the ocean. But under the command of Commander Ernest Evans, a Native American with a reputation for boldness and a deep commitment to his men, the Johnston was about to write herself into legend. The Johnston was part of a small task unit called Taffy 3, one of several such units providing air support for the landings on Leyte Island. Taffy 3 was comprised of 6 escort carriers, little more than converted merchant ships pressed into service, and a screen of destroyers and destroyer escorts, relatively lightly armed and armored. They were expecting to deal with submarines and the occasional stray aircraft, nothing more. But on the morning of October 25, 1944, the unimaginable happened. Through a gap in the American lines, a powerful Japanese fleet, the center force commanded by Admiral Takeo Kurita, steamed into the open waters off Samar. This force included battleships like the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, bristling with massive 18-inch guns. It was a force designed to crush any resistance, and it was heading straight for Taffy 3. Commander Evans didn't hesitate. He knew that Taffy 3 was hopelessly outgunned, that they faced annihilation. But he also knew that they were the only thing standing between Kurita's force and the vulnerable transports supporting the landings at Leyte. Without orders, without a moment's thought for his own safety, Evans ordered the Johnston to charge. He barked over the radio, "Prepare to attack, make smoke, make smoke." The Johnston, along with the other destroyers and destroyer escorts, charged into the teeth of the Japanese fleet. They laid down a thick smoke screen, attempting to obscure the carriers and buy them time to escape. It was a desperate gamble, a suicide run against overwhelming firepower. The Johnston plunged into the fray, firing her 5-inch guns and launching torpedoes at the approaching battleships. She scored hits, damaging the heavy cruiser Kumano. But the Japanese battleships responded with devastating volleys. The Johnston was quickly hit, her bridge wrecked, steering damaged, and many of her crew killed or wounded. Commander Evans himself was injured, but he remained in command, shouting orders from the exposed bridge. Despite the damage, the Johnston continued to fight. She weaved through the chaos, dodging shells and torpedoes, pressing home her attacks. She even engaged the battleship Congo in a gun duel, an almost comical mismatch of firepower. The Johnston was like a terrier nipping at the heels of a giant, refusing to back down. The fighting raged for hours. One by one, the other ships of Taffy 3 were sunk or crippled, but the Johnston, battered and burning, refused to surrender. Finally, after expending all her torpedoes and most of her ammunition, with her engines failing and her hull riddled with holes, the Johnston was surrounded. Commander Evans gave the order to abandon ship. The remaining crew, those who could still move, scrambled over the side into the shark-infested waters. Moments later, the Johnston succumbed to her wounds and slipped beneath the waves. Commander Evans was never seen again, posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary heroism. The sacrifice of the Johnston and the other ships of Taffy 3 bought precious time for the American carriers to escape and for reinforcements to arrive. Kurita, believing he was facing a much larger force, lost his nerve and retreated, abandoning his mission to destroy the landing force. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was ultimately a victory for the Americans, and the courage of the men of the USS Johnston played a crucial role in that victory. Their story is a reminder that even in the face of impossible odds, courage and determination can make a difference. Now close your eyes and let the gentle rhythm of the waves carry you to sleep, remembering the brave men of the USS Johnston who gave their all for their country and for each other. Good night.